The Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on H.R. 2295, introduced by Representative MacArthur, the National Energy Security Corridors Act. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearing are limited to the chairman and the ranking member and the vice chairman and a designee of the ranking member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. I also ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. MacArthur, and the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Rozier, be allowed to sit on the dais and participate in today's hearing. Hearing no objection, so ordered. And I also ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for my opening statement. This morning's hearing is on H.R. 2295, the National Energy Security Corridors Act, introduced by Representative Tom MacArthur and Representative Cedric Richmond, legislation that would facilitate natural gas pipeline rights-of-way on federal lands. If we're going to have an open and honest discussion about the energy needs of this country, a necessary part of that dialogue must be dedicated to how that energy gets from point A to point B. If it was only just that simple. The truth of the matter is that our nation's energy infrastructure needs are facing more challenges by the day. We cannot get our domestic resources to American families and businesses that rely upon them for daily use. Hydro, solar, wind, coal, natural gas, nuclear, and crude all are facing an uphill battle when it comes to getting these important energy resources to market, especially when you have to cross federal lands to get there. But it doesn't have to be that way. Our nation's energy landscape has completely changed over a relatively short period of time, and our energy infrastructure is still catching up. For instance, in 2007, the Marcellus Shale was producing just over 1 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas. This April, Marcellus averaged 16.7 billion cubic feet per day and accounts for 18% of our nation's natural gas supply. We should be proud of the fact that the United States is the global energy leader. U.S. oil and gas production has surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia. Yet we still see over 25 states in January of this year where families are facing residential natural gas prices that are higher than the national average. As you can see displayed on the screens, most of these states are on the East Coast. And you'll see the red states on the U.S. map there on both screens. Massachusetts is 54% above the national average. New York is 11% above. Even right here in the D.C. metro area, we see Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia in the double digits. Pennsylvania is mere hours away from this hearing room and producing over 16 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day. Doesn't it make sense that this energy produced by the American people should be able to reach these East Coast markets? One of the biggest obstacles preventing the full benefits of our nation's shale gas revolution from reaching these areas is federal lands. While all other agencies under the purview of the Secretary of the Interior are able to negotiate rights of way so that natural gas pipelines can cross federal lands, the Mineral Leasing Act exempts National Park System lands from having this authority. To put it simply, every single time a pipeline needs to cross a parcel of land managed by the National Park Service, a company needs to get congressional approval. Since the late 80s, there have been 5 bills to grant this approval. It should not take an act of Congress to get this done. Representative MacArthur's legislation demonstrates a willingness to work across the aisle and formulate common sense, bipartisan solutions that will help connect areas where the shale gas revolution is charging ahead to areas where it can be utilized. This bill provides the Secretary of the Interior with the authority to permit right-of-way for natural gas pipelines only on all federal lands. The bill also takes a creative approach in providing the Secretary additional authority to work with her counterparts at the federal, state, and local level to plan for the future and find areas that make the most sense for natural gas pipeline crossings and to designate those areas as national energy security corridors. The issue at hand is very simple. Federal lands are entrusted to the federal government for a reason, to make sure those federal lands are being managed to the best interests of the American people. The long-standing position to just say no or go ask Congress has never been a workable solution for all parties involved. We cannot stand idly by as entire regions of our nation are held back from our vast domestic and affordable natural gas supply. There has got to be a way for responsible land management and energy security to coexist. I think Mr. MacArthur's bill puts us on that path. The United States does not derive energy security from production alone. It also comes from harnessing these energy resources and using them to help American families and American businesses thrive on our shores. As more and more Americans rely on domestic natural gas for electricity generation, heat, and manufacturing, we need to find ways to help that supply get to where it needs to go. I hope this is one of the areas where we can work together across the aisle to promote economic prosperity and grow energy security in our nation. I now recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to start out by saying that I think we can have a productive, bipartisan conversation about building natural gas pipelines when they are thoughtfully sited. Pipeline infrastructure is necessary to prevent wasteful venting and flaring at oil wells, to allow power plants to receive the steady fuel supply that they need to switch away from coal to natural gas, and to keep consumers from facing painful price spikes during cold weather. And when planned properly, I also support the designation of infrastructure corridors. It simply makes sense to identify areas that are less environmentally sensitive and have fewer land use conflicts, and to try to concentrate new pipelines or transmission lines in those areas. Unfortunately, the bill we're discussing today still needs more work in order to accomplish these positive goals. We need a bill that speeds the development of well-planned new pipelines while paying attention to landowner and community concerns and protecting sensitive areas. The bill as written overturns the long-standing requirement for congressional approval of natural gas pipelines through national parks. Congress specifically required this extra level of attention because our parks deserve a higher standard of care. We have repeatedly passed laws to authorize pipelines through national parks, and I believe that Congress should retain that responsibility. This bill goes further than that with regards to national parks. It would have the Secretary employ the principle of multiple use for routing pipeline corridors through parks. For those who are less familiar with the concept, multiple use is how the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service operate. It means managing the land to balance a variety of different uses, from recreation to energy production to timber harvesting to grazing to conservation. But that is not the mission of the National Park Service. Its mission is to conserve and protect particularly special natural and cultural resources for the enjoyment of future generations. This bill would effectively amend that mission and provide for natural gas pipeline corridors. I believe that's wholly inappropriate. That's a wholly inappropriate use of our national parks, and it's not necessary in order to meet our needs to upgrade and expand our natural gas pipeline system. The bill as written would also establish corridors with virtually no public input. Utilities and pipeline companies are given the opportunity to suggest corridors that limit community impacts to the extent practical. And state, local, and tribal governments get to weigh in, although not about impacts to their states or towns, but only on what routes are the most cost-effective and commercially viable. When combined with the waiver of the National Environment Policy Act in this bill, the public is effectively shut out from having a say in these corridors. This could result in more local opposition to new pipelines and would be counterproductive to building the infrastructure that we need. And I repeat, we need to build infrastructure. Another concern is that the mandate in the bill that the Secretary designate no less than 10 corridors in the eastern half of the United States. It's an arbitrary minimum and ignores the findings of a report from the Department of Energy issued less than 4 years ago and written to fulfill Section 368B of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. That report concluded that energy corridors on federal land in the East are unnecessary and unhelpful. It states, quote, fragmented patterns of federal land jurisdiction in the East, coupled with limited opportunities for utility-scale development on many classes of federal land, make the designation of federal energy transport corridors an inefficient solution to resolving energy transmission siting challenges. The Department of Energy's recently released Quadrennial Energy Review, which has received praise from both sides of the aisle, offers some practical suggestions on how to improve how we site and permit pipelines. One of the recommendations, prioritizing early and meaningful public engagement, is in contrast to the approach taken in this bill. The rest of DOE's recommendations, I also believe, deserve careful consideration. But careful consideration, unfortunately, is not what this particular bill is about. It's about a rush to designate unnecessary corridor with almost zero public input. But I hope we can work together to craft legislation that can help to site pipelines on public lands in a more thoughtful way. Thank you, and I yield back.
All right, thank you. And I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. MacArthur, for a brief statement on the bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Lowenthal. I appreciate this speedy hearing on the National Energy Security Corridors Act. If all of Congress moved this fast, we would be getting somewhere, I think. And I want to thank Representative Richmond. Couldn't be here today, but has supported the bill and made it truly a bipartisan effort. Without objection, I'd like to submit my written statement, Representative Richmond's written statement, and supporting statements from the American Natural Gas Alliance and the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America.
If there's no objection, so ordered.
Thank you. This bill is about enhancing natural gas distribution, making it more reliable, resilient, secure, and promoting economic growth. Let me frame the issue. America is committed to energy independence, and we should be. The President supports it, Congress supports it, and more importantly, the people of the United States support it. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 required multiple agencies to establish energy corridors across federal lands. 10 years later, we have exactly 0 of those corridors in the eastern United States. Why? Because the National Park Service lacks the authority to negotiate natural gas pipelines. It requires an act of Congress for every individual project. Let me give one example. The Appalachian Trail is a major, huge national park, 2,200 miles long, comprised of 14 states, and to get a pipeline across it requires an act of Congress. The Department of Interior can't issue those permits. There is no sense in using a legislative body to manage and oversee individual site-specific applications. It's bad for consumers. It's bad for the producers in the West. I would point to the map that's up on the board. It's similar to the one the chairman referenced earlier. In Linden, New Jersey, near to me, we're paying $22.35 for 1 million BTUs. $22.35. Go to Wichita, Kansas, it's $2.64. It's nearly 10 times in the eastern United States. That isn't good for anybody. This bill is a simple effort to try to solve this by requiring the Department of the Interior to do what they should have done years ago, and that's designate at a minimum 10 energy corridors across federal lands within 2 years of enactment of this legislation. This is for natural gas only. It would also streamline the process for granting rights of way across those corridors. This is not a new concept. The Mineral Leasing Act authorized the Secretary of the Interior to grant rights of way across federal lands except for the national parks. The National Park Service already grants rights of way across its lands for electric transmission lines, for telephone lines, for water lines. So why was natural gas left out? Well, maybe because the Mineral Leasing Act was passed in 1911. And I don't think we were thinking about natural gas pipelines over 100 years ago. It's high time for us to update our legislation to allow for natural gas pipelines. And I want to point out that every individual project still has to go through permitting that is subject to the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. The bill enjoys broad support for good reason. It will further energy independence, and I believe national security along with it. It'll create jobs, both construction and maintenance jobs. That's why the operating engineers and the building trades union supports it. It's environmentally sensitive. It's natural gas only. It's planned, intentional, and it's a cohesive approach. It ends this willy-nilly, haphazard approach of approving one pipeline at a time through an act of Congress. In my mind, this is a common-sense update to a 100-year-old law. It brings our energy policy into the 21st century, and I urge support and yield back. And I encourage my colleagues who might see issues with it here and there, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. This is good legislation, and it'll certainly help people in the eastern United States. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to now introduce the witnesses, but before I begin, Mr. Rouser would like to briefly introduce your constituent who's testifying before us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that very much. I am balancing my time here with a roll call vote over in the House Agriculture Committee, and so after I introduce Mr. Linwood Parker, the mayor of Four Oaks, I'm going to have to run right on out. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry I will not get an opportunity to listen to your testimony. But I have known Mr. Parker since I was a toddler. He went to school with my mother and her two sisters, and they have probably a number of different stories that they would love to tell you, which I will not. However, what I will state for the record is that the mayor, the fine mayor from Four Oaks, is a man of good common sense and a great deal of humor as well, and I commend him highly to the committee. I'm sure he will have testimony worthy of this committee and worthy of the issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Rouser. Fortunately, you don't have very far to go. You're on the same floor in this building. So we also have testifying today Mr. Tim Spisak, Senior Advisor for Minerals and Realty Management of the Bureau of Land Management, Mr. Jim Moore, Vice President of Commercial Development for the Williams Companies, Mr. Sean McGarvey, President of North America's Building Trade Unions, and Mr. Gregory Bupert, Senior Attorney for the Southern Environmental Law Center. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements for 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the lights on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light comes on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I would ask that you finish your statement at that time. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. Spisak to testify.
Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Lowenthal, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the views of the Department of Interior on H.R. 2295, the National Energy Securities Corridors Act. My name is Tim Spisak, Senior Advisor for Conventional Energy with the Bureau of Land Management, and I'm accompanied by Ray Savajoy, and an Associate Director with the National Park Service. I want to thank the subcommittee for focusing on the important national issue of energy transition corridors. The department shares the subcommittee's goals in providing the safe, timely, and efficient transmission of energy resources across federal lands. We appreciate the subcommittee's efforts on the legislation and would like to continue to work with you to find ways to further our common goals. The BLM administers public lands for a broad range of uses and manages lands with some of the most advanced energy development in the world. Our contribution to the national energy portfolio provides an important economic benefit. In fiscal year 2014, Onshore federal oil and gas royalties exceeded $3 billion, approximately half of which were paid directly to the states in which the development occurred. We are coordinating closely with partners across the country to ensure that the development of energy resources occurs in the right places and that those projects are managed safely and responsibly. The BLM places a special emphasis on transparency and public processes to incorporate the input and needs of the American people. The BLM's activities provide critical infrastructure as well as energy for our nation, reducing our reliance on oil imports while protecting our public land and water resources. As part of this effort, we are working with other agencies in support of Executive Order 13604 to improve the performance of federal permitting and review of infrastructure projects by increasing transparency and predictability. In 2009, under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, the department designated approximately 5,000 miles of energy corridors, amending 92 land use plans in 11 western states. Since 2009, the BLM has participated in the approval of 9 major pipeline expansion projects totaling nearly 2,000 miles of new oil and gas pipeline, with over 1,000 of those miles crossing federal lands. In the next 18 months, the BLM is expected to complete review of 3 more major pipeline projects totaling nearly 1,000 additional miles, nearly half of which are on federal lands. These are in addition to the thousands of miles of smaller oil and gas pipeline projects approved every year. While the department supports the goals of H.R. 2295, we believe many of the activities authorized by the bill are already within the scope of existing authorities. We also feel that the bill's NEPA waiver would only complicate the deliberative process necessary for the appropriate consideration of specific authorization decisions. The BLM routinely designates energy corridors as part of a land use plan or along with the environmental review for a major infrastructure project. These are typically addressed with an EIS level analysis, which includes substantial agency, tribal, public, and industry input. The department is committed to providing full environmental review and public involvement opportunities required by NEPA for proposals for the use of the nation's public lands. The department also questions the significant role given to it in designating corridors in the eastern United States under H.R. 2295. The department manages very little multiple-use land in the east, where it has a significantly different role than it does in the western United States. Finally, as expressed in our written statement, the department strongly opposes the bill's provisions that would authorize the Secretary to issue a right-of-way on national public service lands. The statement notes that the exclusion of national parks from the Mineral Leasing Act has not prevented the issuing of rights-of-way for pipelines through national park units. The department has supported legislation authorizing rights-of-way for oil and gas pipelines on a park-by-park basis when it has been appropriate to do so. Mr. Chairman, the Department of Interior has a proven record of facilitating responsible siting of oil and natural gas pipelines. We appreciate the subcommittee's interest in this important work and look forward to working with you on these important issues. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
And thank you. The chair now recognizes Mayor Parker to testify.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, ranking members and members of the subcommittee, I come today to talk a little about the end benefit of the natural gas pipelines. Last night, as I spent the night in Washington, it was a little sleepless. All young people, myself included, have a dream of coming to Washington and speaking to the leaders and be able to utter some words that might unite us in something that will help our community. That dream was realized when you invited me to speak. I only hope that the words that I speak today will enable you to make a wise decision, because the people are in need. Our people need to be part of the manufacturing and building of products. We need to be competitive worldwide. In our community, we have a business park, and Becton Dickerson, an international medical device company, has the largest distribution site on the East Coast. But in 4 Oaks, we hope to be able to not only ship it, we hope to be able to make it and ship it. And to be able to do that, we're going to need natural gas. Manufacturing requires natural gas. I'm aware, as a lady told me once about an issue at home that I was involved in, that all pancakes have two sides. One might be just browner than the other. So I don't come today to argue the right or wrong of the other side of the pancake. I come today to simply say I am encouraged from what I've heard this morning that this is a bipartisan bill, and the fact that you're moving swiftly to reach a decision that can affect so many people across the country. Let me tell you a little bit about my town. I am the mayor of the town, elected by my peers, just as you have been. My town is in eastern North Carolina. We're located on Interstate 95, halfway between New York City and Miami. We take pride in our southern heritage. We have local merchants and business owners and historic downtown. We have a strong sense of community, just like thousands of other small towns across our wonderful nation. I'm here today as a local mayor of these small towns, just one of those small towns, but I hope you'll let me represent all of them. 4 Oaks is located in Johnston County in the eastern part of North Carolina, and it's important that you know a few things about eastern North Carolina so you can better understand why I'm here today. Eastern North Carolina has over 1.4 million residents and added on average 15,000 residents per year since 2005. In 2013, the median household income was $40,469 compared to the national average of $52,250. 20% of eastern North Carolina citizens were living in poverty, compared to 15% of the nation's citizens. The number of new businesses started in the regions has dropped 64% since 2005. Now, I don't know the intricacies of the bill. What I do know is that this bill will help quicken the development of future energy infrastructure and lead to much needed increase in industry in the towns, cities, states across the nation. My town of 4 Oaks is made up of many honorable men and women, and they all have something in common. They want and they need to be able to provide better for their family, and they want to see a better life and better opportunity for their children. In closing, I want to pass this on to you. I talked with one of my neighbors, a constituent, before I left, and he passed this on to me, and I'll pass it on to you. He said, when you get there, tell them we got. Now, I know that's not perfect English, but what he was saying is, we are all we've got. We're in this together, and we've got to be part of the solution. I believe I'm here, and I'm hearing that we are going to be part of that solution that's going to create those jobs, those manufacturing jobs we need. Because we all know that the most empowering thing in life outside of our faith is a paycheck on Friday. And I hope this will be the end result of these hearings. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Moore to testify.
Good morning. Chairman Lamborn and Ranking Member Lowenthal and the rest of the subcommittee, I'm privileged to appear before the subcommittee today to speak in favor of H.R. 2295, legislation to restore to the National Park Service the authority it was thought to have for decades, the power to grant natural gas pipelines rights of way to cross property owned or administered by the National Park Service. I'm Jim Moore, Vice President of Commercial Operations for Eastern Interstate Pipelines at the Williams Companies, one of the larger natural gas infrastructure companies in the United States. By virtue of our long history of building and operating interstate pipelines, we have had many occasions to work with the Interior Department and specifically the National Park Service. Segments of our pipelines touch national park property in at least 3 locations today. In 2 cases, those pipelines have coexisted with the parks for decades. In the case of the third, located in the New York City area, We have just recently completed the project. In addition, other pipeline companies have similar crossings of national park property. I certainly believe that the Interior Department is very capable of making decisions about pipelines crossing national park property. The National Park Service has a long history of carefully evaluating natural gas pipeline proposals before they are brought to Congress for approval. Clarifying that the Department of Interior has the authority to approve natural gas pipeline crossings of National Park Service property will not only lead to a continuation of this thorough evaluation of such requests, but will at the same time eliminate the delay projects encounter while waiting for congressional action to approve those decisions. To my knowledge, no pipeline company has sought legislation to allow park crossing without first conferring with the National Park Service, and Congress has not considered such legislation without asking the National Park Service for its input. The added step of congressional approval delays projects, in some cases for years, while the pipeline company, its customers, and the National Park Service await congressional action. The case with which I am most familiar involved expanding natural gas service into New York City, specifically Brooklyn and Queens, and was largely needed to meet increased demand due to customers switching away from fuel oil to natural gas. My company, Williams, worked with our local distribution company customer to develop an infrastructure solution which would have minimal impact on residents of the city. The only practical route involved drilling under part of the Gateway National Recreation Area, which is managed as a national park, and locating a meter station in the park. That solution was widely supported by local officials, the governor of New York, and even some local park groups. Because the project posed several unique challenges, our discussions with the National Park Service were long and detailed, but they ultimately resulted in an agreement that both sides found acceptable. We originally started discussions with members of Congress about the need for legislation to approve the crossing in 2009. A bill addressing the issue was introduced in 2011 and ultimately enacted at the end of 2012. During that time, agency work on our application for the project slowed considerably, we believe due to the uncertainty around the timing of the necessary congressional action. It's difficult to say with certainty exactly how much time the requirement for congressional approval of the agreement added to the project, but the project ultimately took 6 years to complete, almost 3 years more than planned. This type of delay and uncertainty makes it difficult and costly to add the necessary pipeline infrastructure to meet customer needs for clean-burning natural gas. Williams works very hard on all of its projects to minimize any property and environmental impact while ensuring adequate natural gas supply infrastructure is in place to meet the needs of individuals, business, and industry. We actively engage all parties to find the best way to do this, and I believe other pipeline companies do the same. In my opinion, the National Park Service has fully demonstrated the capability to engage with pipeline companies on this issue while protecting the property in their care, and we look forward to working with them in the future. So, Mr. Chairman, we commend the committee for considering this important legislation to further improve the efficiency with which natural gas pipeline infrastructure is developed. Thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. McGarvey to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the committee. On behalf of the 3 million skilled craft professionals in the United States and Canada that comprise the 14 national and international unions of North America's building trades unions, I thank you for conducting this hearing, and I welcome the opportunity to testify today in support of the proposed National Energy Security Corridors Act. Ensuring that our federal permitting system has integrity and certainty is critical to ensuring that workers that I represent are able to work. Further, good regulation protects our workers and communities while not placing unnecessary burdens on business and job creators. This legislation will provide the necessary framework needed to create energy corridors on federal lands to bring natural gas from well to the consumer. It would hold one agency accountable for the permit while ensuring that other agencies do not fall behind and create a bottleneck. America is now the global leader in oil and natural gas production, but our infrastructure to transport those resources to consumers, businesses, and refineries is being severely hampered because of unnecessary regulatory hurdles. To be sure, pipeline infrastructure has failed to keep pace with the increased production, which has caused several regions of the country to experience shortages and severe price spikes. New England is a perfect example to demonstrate how the lack of sufficient pipeline infrastructure has adverse effects on both businesses and consumers. In 2000, only 15% of New England's electric energy production was from natural gas-fueled power plants. By 2015, that number is fast approaching 50%. Northeast gas transmission has not kept pace with this growth. As a result, there's simply not enough gas coming into the region to reliably and affordably power businesses and manufacturing plants. If there were a corridor, a single lead agency, as well as accountability, the needs of millions of residential gas customers could be met without excessive delays. Investment in capital construction spending is not only an economic stimulus, but it provides insightful data on how shale-driven gas production is reshaping major sectors of our economy, including the construction industry. Last fall, a study conducted by the University of Illinois concluded that natural gas development in the Marcellus region was directly responsible for over 72 million man-hours of work in local construction markets during the years 2008 to 2014. Those 72 million man-hours of construction work translated into the creation of roughly 45,000 jobs. Today, in just about every region of this nation, we are experiencing a shortage of pipeline capacity to support increased gas electric generation. Fortunately, we are not experiencing a shortage of companies willing to invest the necessary capital to construct those projects. What we are experiencing, however, are significant regulatory delays that are preventing these investments from moving forward. Currently, the United States ranks 41st in the world in dealing with construction permits, a key World Bank metric measuring how easy it is to actually build something. That is why North America's building trade unions commend Congressman Tom MacArthur for his work to craft a legislative proposal that would designate the national energy security corridors for the construction of natural gas pipelines on federal land. When it comes to construction of our nation's energy infrastructure, North America's building trade unions are at the center of this work. The success of our unions is predicated on the recruitment, development, and training of the safest, most highly trained, and productive skilled craft workforce found anywhere in the world. It may surprise members of this panel to learn that our rank-and-file members, in conjunction with our signatory contractors, collectively and jointly fund to the tune of roughly $1 billion a year a nationwide network of 1,600 local joint labor management apprenticeship training programs, or JATCs as we call them. All these investments are private investments from our rank-and-file members and our contractors. There's no taxpayer money involved. In order for this training infrastructure to prosper and succeed, we need both public and private investments in capital construction projects in order to create those structured career training opportunities. With the passage of this and other permitting reform efforts, we can allow the billions of dollars in projected pipeline investments to move forward in an expedited fashion, and our unions and contractors can utilize our market-driven, world-class training infrastructure to provide structured career training pathways. Mr. Chairman and members of this subcommittee, let me be clear. My members want to get to work on these critical projects, and our unions and our contractor partners want to provide job training opportunities for your constituents. North America's building trade unions stand ready to work with this subcommittee, as well as the full Natural Resources Committee and the entire U.S. Congress, to pass the National Energy Corridors Act, as well as additional and innovative laws, regulations, and mechanisms that will expedite the approval of critical energy infrastructure projects. Our training facilities are built, our workers are standing by, and our unions are ready to assist the American energy infrastructure revolution. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to express these views here today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Bupert to testify.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the committee. My name is Greg Bupert. I'm a lawyer with the Southern Environmental Law Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. I appreciate the chance to address this subcommittee about the process for locating interstate natural gas pipelines. Right now, this is an issue of critical importance to communities in Virginia where I live and work. The transmission of natural gas from the Marcellus Shale is a new challenge for Virginia. We are looking for solutions. SELC supports a regional planning process that draws on input from affected communities for locating natural gas pipelines. Unfortunately, this legislation doesn't provide that opportunity. Instead, it would cut the public out of the process. It would lead to more conflicts and pose greater burdens on private property and local communities. In the last year, companies proposed 3 natural gas pipelines across Western Virginia. These pipelines, if they were built, would impact some of our state's most iconic landscapes, like the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Shenandoah Valley. They would cross many acres of public and private lands, and they have encountered broad opposition. The principal reason for the public's concern is that these projects are not innocuous undertakings. Take the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. During construction, this pipeline will impact almost 13,000 acres in 3 states. Any project at this scale would be disruptive, but then this will not be just any project. Much of the route will be built on private land acquired under the threat of eminent domain. Many landowners are concerned about the springs and wells on their property that provide their drinking water. One landowner in Livingston told FERC that the pipeline would pass through 4 springs and 1 well, every single water source on his property. Larger communities are also concerned about water. Augusta County, for example, depends on high-yield wells for its municipal water, and the county's experts concluded that blasting for the pipeline threatened this water supply. Other landowners are concerned about the investments they have made in their property. One has spent 3 decades managing his forest for hardwood timber. Another has built an inn near the Blue Ridge Parkway. The pipelines would affect both. The point of these examples is that pipeline construction does not happen in a vacuum. These projects will have real impacts that must be understood before a route is approved. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline projects were announced last summer. Each company rejected a route similar to the others as too environmentally harmful for their project. For the public, there's little belief that these companies have anything other than their own self-interest at heart. What we need in Virginia right now is a regional plan. We need to know whether the demand for natural gas justifies new pipeline infrastructure in our state. And if a new pipeline is needed, we need to identify a route that is the most protective of private property, local communities, and the environment of the entire region. This approach only makes sense. We can agree, I think, that responsible, deliberate planning is how we should build large-scale infrastructure that impacts thousands of acres. We should avoid unnecessary construction by answering the question, do we need a new pipeline? And if the answer is yes, we need to find the best and least harmful way to do it. The designation of pipeline corridors on federal lands is one possible outcome of a regional planning effort, but this cannot and should not be done without public involvement. Nor should there be an arbitrary mandatory requirement that 10 such corridors be designated in the East. In Virginia and elsewhere in the Southeast, our public lands are intertwined with our communities. Shenandoah National Park and our national forests bolster our economy. They provide abundant clean water to our towns and our businesses, and they draw millions of visitors. A corridor cannot be sited across a national park or a national forest without immediate direct impacts to the adjacent private properties and the local economy. The proposed act does not provide the planning tool that we need. It puts a finger on the scale in favor of pipeline construction over other uses of the public lands, including our national parks, all the while cutting the public out of the siting process. In order to get this right in Virginia and everywhere else and minimize the impacts of natural gas pipelines, we need public involvement. Short-circuiting that process will only lead to more conflicts and place greater burdens on private property and local communities. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
All right, and thank you. We will now begin our rounds of questions, and I have to leave in a little bit because of a conflict. I'll give the gavel at that point to Representative Cook. But first I want to ask my question. The concept behind national energy security corridors is not new. In fact, Section 368 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005 aimed to bring many federal agencies together in order to establish energy corridors throughout our nation for oil, gas, and hydrogen pipelines and electricity transmission. That was a decade ago, but we've made little progress since then. Even President Obama recognized that something should be done. A memo he issued in June 2013 said, and I quote, "An important avenue to improve these processes is the designation of energy right-of-way corridors on federal lands," unquote. Mr. Moore, can you talk about, excuse me, I'm going to ask both Mr. Moore and Mr. Garvey this question on technology and improvements in our pipeline infrastructure. How has technology improved in recent years to reduce or eliminate the possibility of natural gas leaks and to reduce the footprint?
Well, there's been a number of things. For one, we, as have other pipelines, have gone through an extensive process over the last 7 years of testing, checking all of our pipelines, smart pigging our pipelines to make sure that there are no issues with existing pipelines that we have. We have spent a significant amount of money. We have smart pigged, at least for Transco, the pipeline that I'm familiar with. We smart pigged over 90% of our pipelines, and in fact, all of our pipelines that are in high consequence areas. And we'll be doing that every 7 years. As far as additional technology for pipelines, there's a number of things. Horizontal directional drills are in use widely now on many of our projects, where we can drill under sensitive properties without having to affect the surface at all. There are other direct pipe technologies that we've utilized to minimize the impact on streams and wetlands, and we do that extensively on our projects as well. So there's been a number of improvements that we continue to develop, and we work closely through our permitting process with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Of course, we're regulated by the Department of Transportation. We follow all those rules. We've taken significant steps to improve the safety and reliability of our natural gas pipelines.
Thank you. Mr. McGarvey, do you have anything to add to that, like on materials, use of newer and better materials?
I would just say, Mr. Chairman, that through that training infrastructure that I described, we can work with manufacturers and owners on the latest technology development and train the workforce to the requirements of that new technology. So we're constantly retraining our workforce as technology advances. That's why, arguably, we have the safest, most productive craft workforce in the world who are putting these pipelines across the country.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Spizak, the Appalachian Trail, and I'm going to make a digression here for a second. People need to, out in the public, realize the National Park Service is not just the 50 to 60 iconic national parks like Grand Canyon. There are 400 units of the national park system. The Appalachian Trail is one of those. It goes 2,000 miles, and 1,000 miles of that is on federal lands. And of course, that is a barrier that has to be crossed by many of these pipelines. How would you propose to do that if you can't cross the Appalachian Trail, as one example, or well, go under the Appalachian Trail?
Well, as I'd mentioned in my oral testimony, I'm accompanied by Ray Joe, Associate Director with the Park Service. He's available to answer your question, or I'll be glad to take your question back to answer for the record.
Well, we'll have to stick with you because our invitation went to you, so we can't
Understood.
Bring other people to testify, although they are always free to confer with you if you would like that. Would that be of help to you, to just confer with you privately and then you answer the question?
We could try that. As I understand, the Appalachian Trail is not one long federal park. It's subdivided and crosses various jurisdictions, states, and privately owned. So it's not a long single barrier that you might think if you think of it as a single trail.
Okay, thank you for that answer. It does illuminate somewhat the situation, although I still have to say you're still left with 1,000 miles in total. And admittedly, it's not all in one unbroken stretch.
Understood.
But that can present an obstacle that until we pass this bill, it would take an act of Congress to get around, and that can take years in addition to the permitting process and the NEPA analysis and everything else that goes into a pipeline.
Understood.
So I just think we need to pass legislation like this, and I hope we can work in a bipartisan manner to do that. I hope we can get your agency to on board, work with you. I know Representative MacArthur is going to be working with the ranking member and myself and the agencies out there, and let's actually get this done. The working families of our country deserve not to have natural gas that costs 10 times what it does in other parts of the country. Okay, at this point, I will recognize the ranking member, and I'll give the gavel to Representative Cook.